Here's to you. Music objectively exists. When I said that, there were 3 different reactions in the audience. First is, why would you say something that everyone already agrees with? Second is, not really, because music is so subjective that anything you think is music counts as music, the most virgin version of a response. And the third was, based? This is Revolution 9 by the Beatles. It's the most experimental piece they've ever worked on, and I think it's fair to say most people don't really like it that much. I mean, can you blame them? It's chaotic, weird, uncomfortable. Definitely not the first thing people think of when they think music. And to be honest, I really don't think it is music. Yes, I believe some things we call music are in fact not music.
Move this man!
Revolution 9 is what was coined as a sound collage, or a composition of audio clips that are layered, manipulated, and arranged to create a new sound or effect. So, is a sound collage music? Just inherently, is it automatically music? Well, things like old hip-hop sampling can qualify as sound collages, and I'd say, yeah, that stuff is music. But when I hear Revolution 9, it definitely doesn't remind me of hip-hop beats. It kind of reminds me more of noise. And most of my friends tend to agree. By the way, I'm not an absolutist on this. I'm open to being convinced that Revolution 9 is music. But more to the point, Revolution 9 really begs the question, what is music?
So, what does music mean? I asked Twitter that question and got a lot of impassioned and very different answers.
The problem is that all of these answers almost seem to be answering different questions. It's because the question itself is admittedly fairly poorly worded. It kind of almost sounds like I'm asking the question, what is music?
For those of you who watch a ton of music YouTube video essays, this question may seem like old hat and a stale premise. But from what I've seen, I don't think the importance of music and how we define it has been emphasized enough on these channels yet. My fellow YouTubers certainly talk about music with great passion, implying its importance. But at the same time, it feels like most of them are actually dancing around the topic. I want to give 12 Tone credit for a fairly thorough examination of the definition of music, but I think the definition he eventually settles on leaves too much room for lack of meaning and purpose, and fundamentally, music deals in meaning and purpose. I really don't think we've gotten a good and satisfying definition for music to this day from anyone. One that puts substantial enough parameters around it for differentiation, but loose enough to allow for creativity, innovation, and synthesis. And most importantly, one that actually rings true to our lived experiences. That's a really tough task. Someone telling me that my uneven load of laundry wobbling the washing machine or wobbling the dryer in such a way that it creates a rhythm, and then telling me that's music, sounds a bit like bullshit. As someone who has listened to shitloads of music and made music, no. I understand that to many people, this whole endeavor seems unnecessary. Like I'm completely overthinking it, but trust me, if you love music as much as you profess to, this is foundational to appreciating and protecting music. Why does it matter how we define music? I mean, we know what music is, right?
Number nine.
Yeah, do we know what music is? If you're concerned about maintaining the integrity of music and art in an age where AI is on the rise, and there are people in the industry far more concerned with money than truth, then defining what music is of the utmost importance. How can we protect and preserve something we can't even define? How do you know music is changing into something unrecognizable if you could never recognize it to begin with? I'm a believer that if we don't have a definition of music that distinguishes it from other types of sound, it inevitably will lead to a degradation of the art. This sounds very closed-minded and stodgy of you, Mike. Good. It sounds like you're trying to be a gatekeeper, Mike. Absolutely yes. If you don't have standards or parameters for what things are or aren't, how in the world can you make any claim about something being good or bad. It's almost as though judgments of quality and morality require distinctions. Hint at future videos. This isn't music. This isn't music. And just because you want to decide in your head that these sounds magically are music, that doesn't magically turn them into music. This is music. This is music. I didn't have to tell you it was music. You immediately knew when it played that that was music. That's because humans have musical intuition, an innate ability to identify and make music. So on some incredibly fundamental level, we can tell what music is without anyone having to explain it to us. And this leads me to probably my greatest challenge in my entire music career. I've been working on a definition for music for a while now, and I think my definition is pretty great. I'm hoping this is the best definition of music that has ever existed, but I understand that one YouTuber isn't going to solve this gargantuan problem on his own. So I asked you to please give my definition a chance for the duration of this video. And if by the end of the video you still disagree, please let me know in the comments why you disagree. I expect I'm going to have to evolve my positions over time on this. So, I mean, if you can help me understand the truth better, I would be very appreciative. And because this problem is so complex, my definition is a gigantic mouthful. It requires tons of explanation and qualification, so please bear that in mind. It is a lot up front, but throughout this video, we're going to break it down into chunks by using real-world examples. Okay, so my definition for music is ordered, semantically ambiguous sound, organized through cognition, that conveys substantial, sophisticated, or transcendental emotion and meaning. This sound drives humans towards cognitive dissonance relief and synthesis, promoting social cohesion and conflict resolution via communicating an honest signal about the human condition that language and noise can't. Feels like every word in this definition requires its own video to even explain what the hell I'm talking about. Like, I kind of don't blame anyone who just checked out at that point. That was so pretentious, and I kind of want to slap myself saying this out loud. Like, what do I mean by meaning? What qualifies as substantial? Order seems like a very broad term, right? Sophisticated, transcendental, honest signal. Those seems like very fluffy, arbitrary terms. But again, if you bear with me, I'm hoping to elucidate some of these ideas by the end of the video. Playing devil's advocate against myself, I guess under this definition, Revolution 9 could be considered music, right? It seems to fit very cleanly into this definition. Without really understanding the terms that I used in context, I mean, I'd say you're probably right. It could fit the definition. But as we go through this video, I hope I can show you through some examples why I think Revolution 9 doesn't fit into my definition of music. And I'd really like to address up front, I don't think there is a perfect definition for music. By my own estimation, if we could perfectly encompass what music is in words, it would be a contradiction. Like I said in my video reviewing Rick and Rick's interview, I think music is probably ineffable. There's a concept in Christianity referring to God as ineffable, which simply means too great or extreme to be expressed or described in words. It's our word for saying that God is incomprehensible in his totality. I might be willing to describe music as ineffable. I'd have to think a little bit more about that. But I also think we can describe enough attributes about music to be able to determine what it's not. Let's compare my definition of music to some examples of things people call music, but probably aren't. So the first example I'd like to start with is every video essayist's favorite piece, 433 by John Cage. Yep, this is it. Just sitting there like a jackass. For those who are unaware, 433 is a piece that is only composed of rests. That is, no one plays their instruments for 4 minutes and 33 seconds, hence the name. If you want to learn more about this piece, there are endless videos talking about it, tons of meme videos performing it. For our purposes today, just know that it's essentially silence. Is 433 music? Very easy answer, no. In my definition, music requires sound. The piece specifically requires the performer to make no sound, hence not music. Case closed, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Now, someone who has trouble thinking for themselves might object, but Mike, an important part of the piece is the ambient sound. You're supposed to pay closer attention to your surroundings and focus on the ambience of existence. There is sound in the piece, and therefore, it's music. Right, in the world of non-bullshittery, we call that noise. The first word in my definition is order. Order is an essential quality for music to have. Inversely, noise is something we would describe as disordered or lacking order. The order is what makes music an art form. In the case of ambient sound that happens to hit your ears during 433, we would say it doesn't have the sufficiency or kind of order we would classify as music. The ambient noise could have the potential to be musical, but not have substantial enough order to meet the standards of music. This is actually observable in studies on the brain's response to noise and music. Musical order is a big topic that I will be touching on later in the video, especially when it comes to distinguishing music from musical. But I think the more important thing to focus on in this example is that there is no sound originating from the performer. The composer or performer organized nothing. No intelligence organized any sound with the intent of aesthetic elevation. In fact, the performer refused to organize anything. Saying that 433 is music composition is like making a law saying that there's no laws. It's a logical contradiction. This isn't to say that 433 is useless or inherently bad. I mean, the piece directs its audience to take a moment in silence and be more aware of their surroundings, or even just find a moment of peace. That sentiment is more prescient today than ever before. But by any understanding of what musical response is in the human brain, it's not music. If this musical piece, 433, can easily be replaced by just shutting up for 4.5 minutes in a quiet space, then you didn't make music. You made a mindfulness meditation aid. I don't know about you, but every other piece of music that I listen to could not be easily replaced by a baseline meditation habit. And like I said, scientifically, we can measure the musical experience in the brain. I'd be willing to bet thousands of dollars if we did a controlled study of people listening to a 433, compared against literally any actual music, we would see a lack of music activity in the brain for those listening to silence. Maybe in a future video, I can talk about the science of music experience, but until then, we must continue on. The supposed composition of 433 is defined by its absence of composition, or maybe even being very charitable, outsourcing the composition to happenstance, which makes me want to murder hippies. As we'll see when we get to the next example, this is wrong as well. One of the most fundamental places to begin drawing some lines around what music is and isn't is acknowledging that music is sound, not the absence of it. And it's sound organized through intention that is performed. It's not merely up to the subject deciding something is music. Music is created through intention. Yes, even improv, the nonsense side of free jazz, and even this weird-ass thing. Those are all still creation driven by intent. In 433, the intent is not to create. Any sound that is generated by happenstance is not intended to be music. How important is intent when it comes to music? I'd say it's essential. But does artist intent alone make something we'd call noise magically become music? No. And that leads me to our next example. In 1975, Lou Reed released an album called Metal Machine Music. That's it. That is what the entire album sounds like. You can listen to 10 seconds and know what to expect from the remaining hour of this record. This album provides a lot of material for us to examine whether something is music or not. But I want to add a disclaimer up front. As of now, I'm not completely settled on a position for this record. This album absolutely challenges music conventions more than any record I can think of. It's hard to know whether or not to call this music, and I think that was part of the intent of the piece. I lean heavily towards Metal Machine Music not being music, but before I explain why, I want you to know I am very open to hearing other opinions on this. If you have good arguments as to why you think it is music, please let me know in the comments down below. Even if I am wrong about this record not being music, it's a great example for demonstrating the concepts in my definition of music and musical. So let's get some context for Metal Machine Music. Metal Machine Music was the 5th studio album by Lou Reed. It was a drastic departure from his prior work, leaning into what was essentially an hour of noise. Metal Machine Music was mostly panned by critics, though there were some who defended it as his greatest work. This led some fans to speculate that Reed actually made this anti-music as a stunt to get out of his record contract, though pulling some quotes from interviews tells a very different story.
No, it's not the truth. I wouldn't put out a record I don't like just to get out of a contract. That's ridiculous, but it is a great story. It's almost a shame to say it's not true, but in fact, it's not true. I made it because I liked it, not to get out of a contract.
In addition, learning that Reed promised the president of RCA he'd never release an album like that again makes me think that this album was a very sincere enterprise for Lou Reed. Here are some more Lou Reed quotes so we can get an idea for the intent of the record.
My goal at the time was to have a sound in which to surround and intoxicate yourself. I made it out of love for guitar-driven feedback and the squall of the metal machine. I was trying to do the ultimate guitar solo, and I didn't want to be locked into a particular drum beat or pattern or a particular key or beat. That was the idea. Just guitars, guitars, guitars. I thought of it as energy music and a continuation of my work with the Velvet Underground. Most of you won't like this, and I don't blame you at all.
While this doesn't sound like something that would interest me, these quotes tell us two important things. One, Lou Reed seems to genuinely care about making this record. This wasn't meant as a joke, and it wasn't meant to not be taken seriously.
Do you like Berlin?
I've never been there.
The album you made?
Oh, the album. It's a long time ago. I mean, I'm obsessed with Metal Machine Music.
And two, Reed sees the album not only as art, but as music. He presented it as such and believes most people won't like it. So it's completely fair to evaluate this piece against the definition of music. As a matter of fact, knowing how transgressive Lou Reed was, I think he would actually want us to evaluate his record against the definition of music. I think he wants to change the definition, or wanted to change the definition of music. He's passed on now. So let's break down my definition of music step by step and evaluate it. I won't have time to explore every facet of my definition, but I will look more closely at those in later videos. So let's start at the beginning. Semantically ambiguous sound. Very clearly, yes, Metal Machine Music isn't language, so that leaves us with either music or noise. Organized through cognition. Maybe we're taking some liberty with the word organized, but for the sake of expediency, I'll grant it. Lou Reed curated the type and order in which each sound played. That conveys substantial, sophisticated, or transcendental emotion and meaning. I'll be honest, my gut answer on this is absolutely no. Without going into entire videos worth on an explanation of meaning, I would say this doesn't meet the threshold of sufficient meaning to be music. By Reed's own words, he really liked guitar feedback and wanted to make a whole record taking that sound to its most extreme possible. By the artist's own stated intent, I think he just thought this was neat and he liked it. That's not to say that someone can't make a neat sound and then it turns out to actually be music, but not all neat sounds are music. Metal Machine Music seems much more like a technician tinkering than an artist who has something to say. It doesn't seem like someone pointing out a fundamental truth about reality or humanity. To really drive this point further, ASMR is a great example of interesting or fascinating sounds that aren't music. It's relaxing. Sometimes it's more ordered than just random sound. We're coming back to the word order, I promise you. But we certainly wouldn't call it music, even though the sound can be pleasing. The sounds of ASMR do many times have meaning, but not the type of meaning we're evaluating for. Existential meaning is more ambiguous and abstract. Some could even call it artistic, because existential meaning is directly tied to beauty and aesthetics. And psychological studies bear this out. This is the kind of meaning I'm referring to in my definition of music. The meaning derived from ASMR is referential, more immediate and situational, not directly engaging in abstract concepts like music does. While I don't think Metal Machine music has real referential meaning, I really struggled to identify any existential meaning in the piece. I really have no idea at all what that piece is pointing at. It's obnoxious. And this leads me to the term transcendental in my definition. The first thing many of you will think of is Eastern religions and meditation, but in the West, the transcendentals are actually a part of our philosophical tradition, and sadly, a huge part of evaluating art that's been forgotten. I'll be making a video dedicated to exploring the transcendentals in the future, but for now, all you need to know is that they are truth, unity, beauty, and goodness. They are all different, but this is a little Trump. They're all different. Everyone, they tell me truth, beauty, and goodness. Class. They're all different, but they're all closely related to one another. And like I discussed earlier, they all relate directly to existential meaning. And this is what I mean when I say Metal Machine music lacks sufficient meaning. It seems to run far away from truth, beauty, unity, and goodness. And that was probably also the point.
Without doubt, the most fantastic thing you've ever played, bar none. I mean, it makes everybody else look so bullshit and wimpy. Patti Smith and me included, man. It just, wow.
Everyone else looks like a sissy compared to that.
Everybody else looks like they're really old-fashioned, like, you know, that's rock and roll. They really hit where it hurts. They are everything everybody worried about. Every parent in America would freeze in their tracks if they heard this stuff. Everything, you know, they got him an amp, they got him a guitar, now look, there they are. Their worst dreams come true. It doesn't take any talent. All they're doing is banging it. Look at this. It doesn't take any talent. It doesn't take any talent.
It doesn't take any talent.
Accidentally said the quiet part out loud.
For those who've been paying close attention, I skipped over one of the key words in my definition of music because it needs a lot of examination. Order, which is also sometimes included in the transcendentals. I don't think Metal Machine music has the sufficiency or kind of order that would classify it as music. And frankly, it's barely musical. Remember when I mentioned earlier that I have a definition of music that is different from the definition of musical? If we're going to explore musical order, I think now is a great time to look at both definitions side by side. So my definition for musical is experience of emotion through ordered, semantically ambiguous sound characteristics. You'll notice that these definitions are very similar, but they're not the same. That's because there are sounds that can be musical that are in fact not music. Instantly, I think of speech. Speech has an inherent musicality to it called prosody. Prosody provides emotional context to semantic information in speech to help us better understand what someone really means when they're saying something. There are also noises that can be musical, such as birdsong, police sirens. Speech and noise can have musical qualities to them, but they aren't music. To make an analogy that guitar heads will instantly get, all Telecasters are guitars, but not all guitars are Telecasters. In the same way, all music is musical, but not everything musical is music. Music is art, the harnessing of primarily musical aesthetics with intent to convey a substantially meaningful experience. And musical is the sensation, the stimulus in the brain. Something like a police siren or a clothes washer can produce a small musical response in the brain, but not be substantially ordered enough to qualify as music. So when I say that there are some musical qualities to Metal Machine music, I mean that I can identify some musical order within it. So this begs another question. What is musical order? Wait, Mike, you're saying that musical means something that has musical order. That's a circular definition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Yes, we are at the most foundational layer of concepts where definitions start to become circular. This is a common problem in philosophy. Circular definitions are classified as a logical fallacy, but that's not always the case. In our case, it's a limitation of language versus experience. And this points back to earlier in the video. I don't think there is a perfect definition for music. By my own estimation, If we could perfectly encompass what music is in words, it would be a contradiction. Like I said in my video reviewing Rick and Rick's interview, I think music is probably ineffable. So I mean, is that it? Are we just stuck here? We just can't define it any further? Well, if you'll allow me to give you some examples of musical order, I think you'll be able to follow along with me and see that musical order really does exist. And you can experience it for yourself and know what it is. And then after this necessary side quest, we can see how this applies to Metal Machine music. I will try to simplify this as much as possible, but some of these concepts really do deserve their own videos. I'd put up the counter. First, let's break down sound into 3 possible categories. Like I had hinted at earlier in the video, we have speech, music, and noise. Speech has order and semantics. Music has an abstract and transcendent order that is semantically ambiguous, a musical order. Noise lacks substantial order to fit into either category. Humans instinctively categorize sounds into one of these 3 types. Some people will want to call it a social construct. They're wrong. If I say water or aqua or mizu, these are all different sounds, but if we understand the code, we know they all refer to this. The primary order in speech is the concrete semantics or code and syntax of the vocalizations. Conversely, when we speak of musical order, we're talking about things like pitch.
Talk slow, ice cream.
You see? Singing is just sustained talking.
Rhythm.
Now give me some rhythm. Bum, 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 bum. And keep that same rhythm. Go. Okay.
Melody.
Doe, a deer, a female deer. Ray, a drop of golden sun.
Harmony.
Now you, sir. Ice cream. Now you, sir. Ice cream. Now you, sir.
Scream like ice cream.
Music doesn't need all of these elements to be music, but it will have substantial amounts of these characteristics. Substantial enough both to elicit the musical response in the brain and transmit abstract meaning. What makes something like pitch ordered? Well, firstly, it will have a sustained primary frequency. This pitch is A. And specifically A at a frequency of 440 hertz. Things like this rarely occur in nature, signaling us that there could be intent behind the sound. It also will begin to elicit an emotion that we'd describe closer to transcendence than, say, this. The order we see in pitch is how it is sustained, especially in a world that usually points towards entropy and chaos. Now let's say I wanted to go up to the next note, B. This pitch lies around 494 hertz. And if we keep going up the scale of notes, a pattern begins to emerge. This isn't arbitrary. Society didn't just decide one day that these were the pitches and I want to oppress people by picking these pitches. This is a universal innate human trait, scientifically backed. We can mathematically observe the order in pitch, not just measuring the hertz in a sustained tone, but the distance in hertz between each of these pitches that sounds correct. If you look at the distance between them, they can be described as a logarithmic function, which doesn't mean anything to almost anyone other than it's very neat and it's awesome. What's even crazier, all of the cultures on Earth discovered this independently from one another. Before they ran around talking to one another, they discovered this about music. The logarithmic distance between pitches that sounds correct gives us tonality, which then points directly at harmony. Once tonality and by necessity intervals are established, both harmony and melody emerge naturally as their own domains of musical order. The pitches we observe in a piece of music aren't chosen arbitrarily. They're found, they're discovered, they're acquired, and then sustained for an intentional, instinctual period of time. And this takes us to our next domain of musical order, which is rhythm. When and how often are sounds organized together? What sounds are happening when over time? Drums are the first thing that come to mind, but rhythm also crosses over into the realms of melody and harmony. These are actually more fundamental aspects of musical order. There are many domains, many tiers in the hierarchy of musical order, and these become more sophisticated as you go up, such as the structure of a song, verse, chorus, refrain, bridge, things like that. How the sonic palette of a track develops over time. The pacing of a classical piece of music through each movement. The pacing of an album of modern music through each track. So when I'm referencing musical order, these are the kinds of things I'm talking about. All of music theory is essentially assigning words to describe the musical order we observe. Without the musical phenomenon, the order, existing first, the words mean absolutely nothing. Which is why I think so many people get intimidated by theory, because they forget you're supposed to connect these words, these dots on a page, to your ears. That's the connection you're supposed to make. Okay, thank you so much for indulging me on that. Now let's see how this applies to Metal Machine music. So do we observe musical order in Metal Machine music? Yes, and I'll identify that shortly. But do we observe substantial enough order that it passes the threshold of being music, not just musical noise? Let's look at the opening track for some examples. We have sustained pitches, and the overtones coming from the guitar feedback are creating a certain kind of rich, atypical tonality. We have things that almost resemble a repeated melody, like a psychedelic ostinato. There's almost a Lydian modality to the harmony. Now, the rhythm doesn't appear to have any substantial structure to it, but that doesn't immediately disqualify it. These words coming out of my mouth all may as well be like theoretical physics to some of you, but the TLDR is there is definable musical order to this track. These are some of the more fundamental aspects of musical order that I can identify in it, but what about the higher tiers of musical order? Are there themes? Are there motifs? Does it have a structure? I would say no. Besides the fact that it starts and stops, does it have a beginning and then logical conclusion? Does it have like a statement, a thesis, and then an antithesis, and then a synthesis? Does it have anything remotely resembling the human experience? Is there an emotion that it wants to convey to you? To all of this, I would say no. But does every piece of music have to have these things that I just listed off? I would also say no. Does Metal Machine music give the listener transcendence? To the vast majority of people, I would say absolutely not. However, there are some people, like I have evidence of this, who report after giving it some time to sink in, after getting acclimated to the music, they did feel transcendent while listening to this album. They found the experience highly immersive, which can be an important part of most music. I have no idea how, but I believe that they felt that way. I'm not just going to be like, oh, you're making it up, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking. They probably felt that way. There's a very high likelihood. So, okay, does that lock it in? Is Metal Machine music actually music this entire time? Is it simply music that most people just don't like? Well, here's the thing. Music isn't the only sound art that's immersive. There's an entire field called sound design that revolves entirely around immersing the listener in mood and emotion through timbre. This stuff is awesome. It's immersive. Some might even describe the non-horror variety as transcendent. Some people might describe ASMR that I described earlier in the video as transcendent. Does that make horror sound design music? Does that make ASMR music? I would say definitely not. Granted, Metal Machine music does have more definable musical qualities to it than the sound design or ASMR, but can we really call this noisy craziness music? And this is where I remind you of what I said at the beginning of this section. As of now, I'm not completely settled on a position for this record. It's hard to know whether or not to call this music, and I think that was part of the intent of the piece. Metal Machine music really does sit squarely on the line between music and noise. If I had to go with my gut instinct, I would say absolutely not, this is not music. But I'm not the arbiter of what is and isn't music. There are people who've gotten emotional and cognitive benefit from this art. And yes, I will at least grant that it is art. I will give them that. So just because I don't understand it doesn't mean I can just dismiss their experience out of hand. But I'm also a music professional with years of training and experience. And I've listened to way more kinds of music than I have ever cared to. So I wouldn't say I lack an understanding of what music is. So going with my gut, I would say no, Metal Machine music isn't music. But again, still open to having my mind changed. So why did I go through these insane lengths to demonstrate that these pieces aren't music? A few reasons. One, I wanted to give you guys something interesting to watch while I explain the philosophical concepts I've been developing around music. Two, these are great exercises for testing whether or not my framework is actually usable. Three, if there is objectivity to music, which I believe there is, you can't make claims of objectivity without having standards to compare it to. And standards require definitions. This video hopefully has primed us to head into the next phases of this music objectivity series I'm going to be releasing, where we can begin evaluating whether music is good or bad. I know, taboo subject. There's so much more I wish I could have explained in this video, and I'll be making more videos to address those points I had glanced over. But for now, I'll leave you with this. Music is objective, and it's also subjective. But how can it be both? Well, find out in the next video. I love you. God bless.